My own daughter treated me like a servant in the very house I paid for, all while secretly planning to steal my entire life savings to save her perfect, fake life. She would parade me around for her Instagram photos talking about hashtag family first, then tell everyone I was too confused and senile to manage my own affairs. The disrespect was suffocating, and I had finally had enough. But she made one critical mistake. She thought my silence was weakness. She had no idea that my perfect, satisfying revenge was already in motion, and it was about to bring her entire world crashing down. The California sun has a way of making everything look perfect, especially here in Orange County. It bounces off the turquoise water of the pool, glints off the rim of my mimosa glass, and makes the perfectly manicured lawn look like a sheet of emeralds. From a distance, our Sunday brunch was a portrait of West Coast success. There was my daughter Kim, looking radiant in her white linen dress, her husband Mark beside her, and me, the smiling matriarch, completing the picture. Of course, the truth is always in the details. The sun also highlighted the faint tension in Kim's jaw and the way Mark never really looked up from his phone. And me. My smile was as carefully arranged as the organic, locally sourced fruit platter on the table. Kim held up her phone, angling it to get the perfect shot. She told me to tilt my head a little to look happy. She said it was for the memories. I knew better. It was for her Instagram. A few minutes later, she showed me the post. There I was, frozen in a sun-drenched lie with a caption that read, "So much gratitude for these quiet moments with Mom. Family first. Blessed." I felt a familiar weariness settle in my bones. I had tried to ask her earlier about getting access to my own bank statements, a simple request, but she'd waved it away with a gentle hand on my arm. She said she was just trying to protect my energy, that worrying about finances was a low vibration activity. Apparently, being a prop for her social media was a high vibration one. As soon as the photo op was over, the illusion of leisure evaporated. I found myself clearing the plates, scraping bits of artisanal avocado toast into the compost bin. It's what I did. I was the silent, unpaid helper who kept this perfect house running. I tended the garden, did the laundry, and tidied up the messes, all under the guise of staying active. Mark didn't offer to help, of course. He was busy scrolling through something that made him frown, probably the stock market or whatever crisis was happening on the 405. He was a ghost in his own home, a passive enabler to Kim's quiet tyranny. Later that afternoon, the phone rang, and my heart gave a little leap. It was probably Carol, my best friend from my old neighborhood. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks. I started to get up, but Kim swooped in, grabbing the cordless phone with a bright, false smile. I watched as her face transformed into a mask of saccharine concern. I couldn't hear Carol, but I could hear Kim's side of the conversation loud and clear. She was telling her that I was just so fragile lately, that I needed my rest. She said I was too tired for visitors maybe next month. She made me sound like a piece of antique china too delicate to be handled. She hung up and told me it was just a telemarketer. The lie was so casual, so effortless, it stole my breath. Another bar in my gilded cage had just been locked into place. A little while later, the mail carrier came. I saw Kim walk down the long paved driveway to the mailbox. She sorted through the envelopes, and I saw her freeze. It was a large, stiff envelope with a green certified mail slip on the front. I could see the logo of a major bank in the corner. For a split second, the mask of the serene wellness guru slipped. I saw raw, undiluted panic in her eyes. Her face went pale. Then just as quickly as it appeared, the fear was gone, tucked away behind her practiced calm. She shoved the letter into her expensive purse and walked back to the house as if nothing had happened. But I saw it. I saw the crack in the facade. I couldn't shake the image of her face, the stark terror behind her eyes. Sleep wouldn't come that night. The big, quiet house felt oppressive, the air thick with unspoken things. I got up for a glass of water, my bare feet silent on the cold tile floors. As I passed Kim's office, I heard a sound, A choked, desperate whisper. I stopped pressing my ear against the heavy wood of the door. It was Kim, her voice stripped of all its yoga instructor calm. It was thin and ragged with fear. I could only catch fragments, but they were sharp enough to cut. The whole investment is gone. My blood ran cold. Told us it was a sure thing, a wellness tech startup. A longer pause, then a sob. They're going to foreclose Mark. The letter today was the final notice. I leaned against the wall, my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. This house, my house, the one I had poured my husband's entire life insurance policy into so they could have this perfect life. Then came the final words, the ones that would echo in my mind for days, the ones that changed everything. And we have to get Mom to sign the new loan agreement. It's the only way. By the way, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. We'd also love to hear your own story if you'd like to share it with our community. Now, let's get back to it. I didn't sleep a single minute after hearing those words through the door. I just lay in the dark, the phrases echoing in my head. The whole investment is gone. They're going to foreclose. We have to get Mom to sign. The weariness I'd felt for years had burned away, leaving behind something cold and hard and clear. It was resolve. I finally understood that I wasn't a burden being cared for. I was a resource being managed, a crop waiting to be harvested. When the sun finally rose, casting long shadows across my room, the woman who got out of bed was not the same one who had gone to sleep. The fog of gentle compliance had lifted. I could see everything with a painful, sharp clarity. The next morning, Kim was a whirlwind of anxious energy. It was her book club day, a sacred event in her social calendar. These weren't just friends. They were the wives of doctors and tech executives, the gatekeepers of the neighborhood's social hierarchy. Everything had to be perfect. As she arranged gluten-free scones on a platter, she threw a comment over her shoulder about how she'd be presenting some important family papers for me to sign later. She said it was just some routine estate planning to make things easier for everyone. Her voice was breezy, but I could see the tightness around her eyes. She thought I was the same pliable mother from the day before. She was wrong. Her friends arrived in a wave of expensive perfume and polite laughter, settling into the wicker chairs on the patio. I stayed in the garden, my hands in the dirt, my old straw hat pulled low. I was invisible to them, just a part of the scenery. I listened as Kim steered the conversation from the book to her favorite topic, authenticity. She spoke about living an authentic life, about being true to one's inner self. The hypocrisy was so thick I could have choked on it. That's when I decided it was time. I picked up the garden hose, the nozzle set to a powerful jet stream. I began watering the hydrangeas near the patio, moving slowly, deliberately. As Kim was in the middle of a sentence about embracing one's vulnerabilities, I let my wrist flick. A wide, powerful arc of water shot across the pristine stone tiles. It drenched the corner of the patio, soaking a platter of macarons, and most importantly, the bottom half of Kim's immaculate white designer dress. There was a collective gasp. Kim shrieked as she jumped up the wet fabric clinging to her legs. I immediately turned off the water, my face a perfect picture of horrified concern. I rushed over, letting the hose drop. I made sure my voice was loud enough for every one of her friends to hear. I said, "Oh dear, with all the financial stress you're under. Kim, the last thing you needed was a ruined dress." "I'm so sorry." Silence. The word hung in the air, heavier than the humidity. Financial stress. It was a dirty phrase in this world of effortless wealth. The polite smiles on the faces of Kim's friends froze their eyes, darting from my face to Kim's. I had just taken a private, shameful secret and set it down in the middle of their perfect little circle. Kim's face was a storm of fury and humiliation, her cheeks burning red. Through gritted teeth, she managed a laugh, telling her friends I was just a bit confused sometimes. But the damage was done. The party was over. She hustled them out with a strained grace that was painful to watch. The second the gate clicked shut behind the last guest, her facade didn't just crack. It exploded. She spun on me, her eyes blazing. She asked what I thought I was doing. How dare I say that in front of her friends? Her voice was a low, vicious hiss. I just stood there meeting her gaze. I didn't have to feign confusion anymore. Her rage was the confirmation I needed. She wasn't worried about my well-being. She was terrified of exposure. She took a step closer, her hands clenched into fists, and snarled something I'll never forget. She said I had no idea what was on the line here. I let that sink in. She had just admitted everything without admitting anything at all. The threat was real. The desperation was real. And I was the key to her salvation or her ruin. I didn't say another word. I simply turned and walked back to my room, leaving her fuming on the patio. I locked my door and walked to my closet. From the very back, tucked inside an old shoebox, I took out a small, cheap burner phone I'd bought at a drugstore 6 months ago. Some part of me must have known even then that I might need a lifeline my daughter couldn't cut. My hands were shaking, but my purpose was steady. I scrolled through the single contact I had programmed into it and pressed call. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice, sharp and no nonsense even after all these years, answered. It was Janet, my friend from my old life, a retired lawyer who had a mind like a steel trap. I took a deep breath, the first truly free breath I'd taken in years, and I told her, Janet, I think I'm in trouble. I need your help. Janet's voice on the other end of the burner phone was exactly as I remembered, calm, clear, and sharp as a shard of glass. After I explained the situation, she didn't waste a moment on sympathy. She gave me a plan. The first step, she said, was the hardest. She told me to play the part they had cast for me. I had to be frail, confused, and most of all, defeated. My only job was to make them believe they had won, to lull them into a state of arrogant confidence. She said that arrogance would make them careless, and carelessness was what we needed. I didn't have to wait long to put her advice into practice. The day after the garden hose incident, the atmosphere in the house was thick with a toxic, silent tension. Then that evening, Kim and Mark called for a family meeting. They sat me down on the sofa in the living room, a space that always felt more like a showroom than a place to live. They flanked me on either side, their faces masks of deep theatrical concern. Kim did most of the talking. She spoke in a soft, patronizing tone, the one a person uses on a frightened animal or a difficult child. She told me she was worried about me. She said the incident with the hose proved she was right to be concerned. She used words like cognitive decline and confusion. Mark just nodded along his face, a sad, useless echo of his wife's expressions. The goal, they explained, was to protect me. They had drawn up some papers, a simple power of attorney that would allow Kim to manage my assets for me. She said it would take all the stress off my shoulders, letting me relax and enjoy my golden years. It was a masterful performance of gaslighting a gentle, loving suffocation. I let her finish. I looked from her concerned face to Mark's mournful one. I took a deep, shuddering breath, just as Janet had instructed. I let my shoulders slump. I made my voice sound thin and reedy when I finally spoke. I told them that maybe they were right, that everything was just so confusing these days. Then, with a sigh of what I hoped sounded like complete resignation, I agreed to sign their papers. The relief that washed over them was so profound, it was almost comical. It was like they had been holding their breath for days and could finally exhale. They looked at each other with triumphant, knowing glances. The crisis was contained. The confused old woman had been managed. For the rest of the evening, they were cloyingly attentive, fetching me a blanket and a cup of herbal tea, speaking to me in slow, simple sentences. They believed they were back in complete control. The next day, Kim went out for a long spa appointment, a reward for her successful handling of the family crisis. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I was in my room with the door locked, the burner phone to my ear. Janet was all business. She told me I needed to find the original documents from when I financed the house, the wire transfer receipts, the preliminary title report, anything with my name and a dollar amount on it. She said they were likely in a folder in the back of a filing cabinet I hadn't touched in years. My heart hammered against my ribs as I went into the small study where my old things were stored. The room was mostly filled with Kim's yoga equipment and boxes of things she'd deemed outdated. My old filing cabinet was shoved in a corner covered in a fine layer of dust. I fumbled with the key, my hands shaking. I pulled open the drawer for H, for Home for Henley, and started digging. My fingers brushed past old tax returns and appliance warranties. And then I felt it. A thick manila folder labeled Costa Mesa Property. I pulled it out, my hands trembling as I opened it. It was all there. The bank statement showing the $500,000 wire transfer from my late husband's life insurance payout. The grant deed. The initial purchase agreement with my name clearly listed as the primary investor. It was the proof. The tangible, undeniable truth of what I had given them. Following Janet's instructions, I laid each document flat on the desk and, using the burner phone's surprisingly good camera, took a clear picture of every single page. Then, with a deep breath, I attached the images to an email and sent them to Janet's private address. I felt a surge of triumph so powerful it almost made me dizzy. The first real weapon was now in the hands of my general. Later that afternoon, I was in the garden when Luis, the family's longtime gardener, came by to check on the roses. Kim treated him like he was invisible, but I always made a point to talk to him. He was a quiet, observant man. I asked him about his own family, and he spoke proudly of his daughter, who was studying at the local college. As we talked, he mentioned offhandedly that he'd seen a lot of express delivery trucks coming to the house lately, and that Mrs. Kim seemed more stressed than usual. He even noted that the fancy car she'd been driving last month had been replaced by a much more modest one this month. He didn't know he was giving me ammunition, of course. He was just making conversation. But I filed away every word. Every detail was another piece of the puzzle, another crack in the perfect facade my daughter had built on a foundation of my money and her lies. The 2 days I spent waiting were the calmest I had felt in years. Kim and Mark, believing they had successfully wrangled their confused old mother, treated me with a cloying, condescending gentleness. They were relieved, and their relief made them careless. They left financial statements on the kitchen counter. They spoke openly of their plans to restructure some assets once the paperwork was signed. They thought I was a solved problem, a box that had been ticked. I just smiled, drank my tea, and waited for Janet's signal. It came on a Tuesday morning. Kim announced that a nice man was coming by at 11 o'clock to help us with some family paperwork. She laid out the documents on the polished dining room table, the same table where she hosted her perfect brunches. The stack was thick, full of dense legal language, but on top was the power of attorney form. I saw my name and a line waiting for my signature. Mark hovered nervously in the background, while Kim was beaming, radiating a serene confidence that turned my stomach. The notary arrived precisely at 11. He was a pleasant man in a crisp suit, completely oblivious to the drama he was about to witness. We all sat at the table. Kim explained the documents to me in a slow, sing-song voice, as if I were a toddler. She pointed to the signature line, uncapped, a heavy, expensive-looking fountain pen, and placed it in my hand. Her smile was one of pure triumph. It was the moment she had been waiting for, the key that would unlock my life savings and solve all her problems. My fingers were wrapped around the pen, the tip hovering just above the paper. And then the doorbell rang. Kim's smile faltered. An expression of pure annoyance flashed across her face. She told Mark to get it, probably just a package. I let the pen rest on the table. We heard Mark open the door, a confused murmur, and then footsteps approaching the dining room. When I saw Janet, I almost smiled. She was the very picture of quiet, expensive power, dressed in a tailored navy suit, with her silver hair in a perfect chignon. She carried a sleek leather briefcase. She wasn't the warm, chatty friend I remembered from decades ago. This was Janet the lawyer, a woman who had once made a corporate CEO cry on the witness stand. She walked into the room, and her eyes swept over the scene, the notary, the documents, the pen in my hand. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then she turned her cool gaze on my daughter. She introduced herself with devastating simplicity, her voice calm and clear. She said, "My name is Janet Albright. I am Martha Henley's legal counsel." The words dropped into the room like stones into a silent pond. The notary's professional smile vanished. Mark, who had been trailing behind her, looked like he might faint. Kim stared, her mouth slightly agape, the confident wellness guru completely gone, replaced by a woman in a state of pure shock. Janet didn't wait for a response. She placed her briefcase on the table, opened it, and took out a folder. From it, she produced crystal clear copies of my wire transfers and the original purchase agreement for the house. She laid them out, a neat row of irrefutable facts. She informed Kim that my documented equity in the property was significantly higher than the outstanding mortgage. Then she produced a second set of papers. She told them she'd done some light research into the wellness tech startup they had invested in. She turned the page around for them to see. It was a printout from a major financial news website. The headline was stark: Bay Area Wellness Fund exposed as multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. She wasn't finished. She looked directly at Kim and Mark, her voice dropping a little, becoming even colder. She said that tricking an elder into signing over their assets under false pretenses, especially when they are being intentionally misled about the family's financial state, has a legal name. It's called elder fraud, and it's a felony. That's when the fragile illusion of their perfect life completely shattered. The notary, realizing he was now a witness to a potential crime, began packing his briefcase with frantic efficiency. He muttered something about a scheduling conflict and practically ran out of the room. Mark just crumpled. He sank into a dining chair and put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Kim's face had gone a dead, chalky white. The rage, the panic, the shame, it all swirled in her eyes. Janet delivered one last quiet blow. She mentioned that as a professional courtesy, she had already placed a call to the fraud department at their bank regarding a pending loan application that seemed to have been filed with misleading information. That did it. The mention of the bank of public official consequences broke something inside Kim. A terrible, ragged sob escaped her lips. The whole story came pouring out in a torrent of tears and broken sentences. The scam, the shame of being fooled, the crushing debt, the terror of her friends finding out. She confessed everything. And then she turned to me. Her face was a wreck, tears and mascara streaming down her cheeks. She crawled over to my chair and grabbed my hands. She begged me. She pleaded with me to sign the papers just to save them, to keep the house, to stop everything from falling apart. She was no longer my powerful, controlling daughter. She was a desperate child begging for a rescue. I looked down at her at the ruins of the life she had built on lies. For the first time in years, the power in the room was mine. I gently pulled my hands from her grasp. I looked her directly in the eye, and my voice was perfectly calm and perfectly clear when I gave my answer. I told her no, we would not be signing anything. Instead, she and Mark would be meeting me at Janet's office tomorrow at 10 in the morning to discuss the liquidation of my assets from this property. I slept soundly for the first time in 3 years. The next morning, I dressed with care, choosing a simple but elegant blouse my late husband had always loved. When Janet picked me up, I felt a quiet strength I thought I had lost forever. We didn't speak much on the drive to her office. We didn't need to. The plan was set. The trap was laid. All that was left was for the consequences to finally arrive. Janet's office was on the top floor of a glass tower in Newport Beach, with a panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean. It was a world away from the manicured lawns and quiet desperation of my daughter's neighborhood. The conference room was intimidatingly formal, with a long, dark wood table that felt as cold as a marble slab. Janet and I sat on one side and we waited. Kim and Mark arrived a few minutes late. They looked like they'd been through a war. Mark's face was pale and drawn, and he couldn't seem to meet my eyes. Kim had tried to maintain her usual polished appearance, but the effort showed. There were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, and her hands trembled slightly as she sat down. The serene wellness guru was gone, replaced by a terrified woman who was about to lose everything. Janet began the meeting without any preamble. Her voice was crisp and professional, entirely devoid of emotion. She informed them that they had 2 options on the table. Option 1, she explained, was that she would file a lawsuit on my behalf for elder fraud and financial abuse, and she would hand over all her findings to the district attorney and the bank's fraud department. She let the full weight of that possibility settle in the room. Option 2, she continued, was that they could avoid litigation. They could agree right here and now to immediately list the Costa Mesa house for sale. From the proceeds, my initial investment of over $500,000 would be returned to me in full. In addition, she had calculated a sum for damages, accounting for emotional distress and the effective theft of my retirement assets. For a moment, Kim just stared, her face a mask of disbelief. Then something inside her seemed to snap. The fear was replaced by a final, desperate surge of indignant rage. She started shouting, her voice cracking. She said she couldn't believe I was doing this to my own family. She accused me of being cruel and ungrateful. She actually screamed the words after everything she had done for me. She had given me a home. I let her tirade wash over me. The words that once would have wounded me, that would have filled me with guilt, now felt hollow and pathetic. When she finally ran out of breath, I looked at her, my own voice quiet but firm. I told her she hadn't given me a home. I had bought her a house. There was a difference. My calmness seemed to infuriate her more than an argument would have. She started to plead, the anger dissolving into frantic, tearful bargaining. She talked about her reputation, her friends, the life they had built. She was trying to appeal to the mother she thought she could still manipulate. That's when Janet calmly intervened. She informed Kim that in the interest of a swift resolution, she had already taken the liberty of consulting with a top real estate agent who specialized in her exclusive neighborhood. She mentioned the agent's name, a woman I knew Kim revered as a local celebrity. Janet continued, saying the agent had confirmed the house's substantial market value and assured her it would sell in under 30 days. The market, she said, was very strong. That was the blow that finally broke her. It wasn't the threat of prison or a lawsuit. It was the mention of the real estate agent. It was the stark, practical reality of a for sale sign going up on her perfect lawn. It was the thought of the neighborhood gossip, the social humiliation. That was the hell she truly feared. The fight went out of her completely. Her face crumpled, and she was reduced to a begging, sobbing mess. She pleaded with me to find another way to not destroy her life. She was no longer the powerful daughter. She was a child begging me to fix a mess of her own making. I looked at my daughter, the woman who had treated me as an inconvenience and then as a bank account, and I felt a profound and weary sadness. But my resolve did not waver. This wasn't about cruelty, it was about justice. It was about the price of her choices. I let the silence stretch out, letting her pleas hang in the air until they faded into ragged sobs. Then I gave my final terms. I told her that I would instruct Janet not to press criminal charges on one and only one condition. They had to sign the listing agreement with the real estate agent. Right now. Janet slid a new set of documents across the polished table. It was the real estate contract ready and waiting. Defeated, with tears still streaming down her face, Kim picked up the pen. Mark, a ghost beside her, signed his name without a word. Then she signed hers. It was done. The house was no longer hers to keep. I stood up my part in this finished. Janet would handle the rest. I walked to the door of the conference room and paused, turning back to look at my daughter one last time. She was slumped in her chair, staring at the signature that had just sealed her fate. I told her, "You were so worried about appearances, Kim. I hope it was all worth it." Then I walked out the door and didn't look back. Walking away from Janet's office that day, I didn't feel the triumphant joy I might have expected. Instead, I felt a deep, quiet, and profound sense of peace. It was the feeling of a long and heavy weight finally being lifted from my shoulders. The fight was over. The rest was just logistics. 3 months later, I drove down that familiar street in Orange County one last time. A bright red "Sold" sign was staked into the immaculate lawn I had spent so many hours tending. The hydrangeas were in full bloom. In the driveway, a small U-Haul truck stood waiting, looking utterly out of place next to the manicured perfection of the neighborhood. Boxes were piled haphazardly on the curb. The whole scene was a testament to a life being dismantled. Kim and Mark were loading the last of their belongings. They looked tired and much older than they had just a few months ago. The news of the house sale and the reasons for it had rippled through their community with the speed of a wildfire. The friends who had once flocked to their poolside brunches were nowhere to be seen. They were moving to a small rented apartment on the other side of the county, a place where no one knew their name or the story of their spectacular fall from grace. I had come to pick up a few remaining personal items, things that had been in my old room. Kim saw me, and her face tightened into a familiar mask of bitter resentment. There was no apology in her eyes, no remorse. We had a brief, awkward conversation amidst the boxes. She told me she hoped I was happy now that I had destroyed her life. The words were meant to be a final, wounding blow, but they didn't hurt. They couldn't touch me anymore. I looked at her, my daughter, a stranger filled with a bitterness she had cultivated herself. I felt a deep and quiet sadness, not for myself, but for the person she might have been. I told her that her life was her own to build or destroy, and that I wished her peace. Then I set my final boundary. I told her that if she ever wanted to have a relationship with me again, it would be on my terms, and it would begin with her finding a way to take responsibility for her own choices. I didn't expect to hear from her anytime soon. A week later, I was sitting at an outdoor cafe by the ocean, having lunch with my old friend Carol. She wrapped her hands around mine the moment she saw me, her eyes full of warmth and understanding. We were joined by 2 other friends, women Kim had successfully kept me from for years. We talked for hours, catching up on everything our children, our grandchildren, the silly dramas of our old book club, and I laughed. It was a real, unrestrained laugh that came from deep inside me, and it felt like stretching a muscle I hadn't used in a very long time. Sitting there, surrounded by the warmth of genuine friendship, I felt more at home than I ever had in that big empty house. The story ends here with me, not in a mansion built on a transaction, but in my own small condo in Laguna Woods that I bought with cash. It's not grand, but every morning the sun streams through the sliding glass doors, and every piece of furniture is something I chose. It's a place that feels like me. My favorite spot is the balcony. It's small, but it has a lovely view of the hills, and it's just big enough for my new garden. It's nothing more than a collection of terracotta pots filled with herbs, geraniums, and a stubbornly resilient tomato plant, but it's all mine. This morning I was out there, my hands in the soil, the coastal breeze on my face. The sun was warm and the air smelled of salt and sage. I looked at the little green shoots pushing up from the dark earth, and I felt a sense of peace so complete it was almost overwhelming. I was finally free. I had learned the hard way that the sunshine you have to fight for is the warmest of all. In the sun-drenched quiet of Southern California, a bitter lesson was learned. It wasn't about money, not really, but about the high price of appearances. The beautiful house was just a stage, and it proved that a family built on entitlement instead of respect is a structure doomed to collapse. A daughter mistook her mother's quiet patience for weakness and learned too late that true strength isn't about control, it's the unshakable resolve to claim the peace you've earned. In the end, one woman lost a house while the other, tending a small garden, finally found her home.